LuAZ-969, Volyn, a success story or a mistake. The LuAZ-969, also known as the Volyn, is a unique car that has exceptional off-road qualities. It is able to bypass such well-known models as LuAZ, Niva and Hummer. The history of the LuAZ-969 began in the Soviet airborne forces, where it was used due to its cross-country capability. Then he became popular in the countryside and even won international awards. However, in the 1990s, LuAZ-969 went into oblivion, never gaining widespread recognition. This is surprising because the launch of such a car into mass production can be compared to an attempt to convert a Proton rocket into a walking steam locomotive for a children's park or a nuclear submarine into a washing machine. Of course, it sounds funny, but in fact, there is no guarantee that the result will be a really cool steam locomotive or a unique washing machine. In this article, we will look at the history of the amazing LuAZ-969 Volyn car and try to understand whether it was an incredible success or a fatal mistake. Lutsk automobile plant, LuAZ, is located in the city of Lutsk in western Ukraine. Despite the fact that it is a relatively small city, its history is rich in events. Lutsk automobile plant also made a significant contribution to history, although it did not strive for large-scale production. It all started by accident in the 1950s, when ordinary repair shops turned first into car repair shops and then into machine-building plants. The plant was engaged in the manufacture of agricultural machinery, trailers, and truck repairs. That's how it would have gone on if NAMI, by order of the Ministry of Defense, had not developed a frontline transporter for airborne troops, the TPK. It is difficult to imagine what modern warfare would look like. The TPC is a real military concept, a motorized trolley capable of landing from an airplane. She takes on board a couple of stretchers or 6 sedentary wounded in addition to the driver. The height of the TPC does not exceed half a meter. It has a 4-wheel drive and a winch. In addition, the TPC is also an amphibian that can move through the water due to the rotation of the wheels. It is designed to transport the wounded, transport ammunition, and tow light guns. The driver can operate the TPC lying on the seat or even crawling next to the car, holding the steering wheel. This is especially useful when there is shooting going on around. This amazing device from the description does not look at all like an ordinary passenger car. However, his creators had warm feelings for him. The first incarnation of the model, created in 1958, even received the cute name Nami 049 Ogonyok. The car had all-wheel drive, an axle differential, and 2 interlocked wheel differentials. It also had wheel reducers and an independent torsion bar suspension. The body was made of fiberglass, which made it not too durable. The power plant was represented by a 22-horsepower motor from the MD-65 motorcycle. All this was acceptable for a prototype, but not for a military machine. The second prototype, known as Nami 049A, had an open steel body with an awning. In the process of finalizing the design, the developers abandoned the center differential and made the rear axle switchable. This allowed the car to move better on a hard surface. The most significant change was the installation of a more powerful V-shaped 4-cylinder engine with a volume of about 0.9 liters, 887 cubic centimeters, with air cooling. The engine power was 27 horsepower. It was such an engine that was planned to be installed on the modified LuAZ-969 Zaporozhets. The participation of specialists from Zaza in the development made it possible to implement this plan. Their contribution to the project determined the final architecture of both the military transporter and the civilian version of the machine after conversion. A unique model called the LuAZ-967 was put into production in Lutsk. These amazing machines were produced from 1961 to 1989, periodically updated. In 1969, the armed forces of the USSR adopted it. It was used in airborne troops and motorized rifle units and was also supplied to the Warsaw Pact countries. For example, the GDR Army received about 250 units of the Soviet LuAZ model. This amphibious transporter still has no direct analogs. The last stage of evolution was the LuAZ-967M, which looks more like a light Jeep than a truck with an engine. Some parts were unified with cars of other models, electrics from UAZ, hydraulics from Moskvich, and the scope of application expanded. Light machine guns began to be installed on cars. In the early 90s, even three-axis models appeared, but they remained prototypes. The TPC served as the basis for the creation of the Volyn, a unique Soviet all-terrain vehicle. In all countries and generations, engineers have sought to adapt military equipment to meet the needs of agriculture, and this path was often the only one available to Soviet specialists. The designers removed the amphibious properties, placed the driver and passengers in the cabin, added fastened canvas sidewalls to the canvas top, and gave the body a more familiar shape. Otherwise, this rural Jeep remained the same TPC. The first 30 models, called LuAZ-969, rolled off the assembly line in Zaporozhye in 1964. Then in Lutsk, the design was improved to an industrial design, and mass production was launched in 1967. There is still debate about which car can be considered the first Soviet car with front-wheel drive. The arguments may be different, but the fact remains that it was the LuAZ-969B that became the first commercially available front-wheel drive car. It is important to note that this SUV, created on the basis of the TPC, has front-wheel drive with the possibility of connecting the rear axle. In addition, by the beginning of serial production, the Melitopol engine plant did not have time to provide the new model with a rear axle gearbox, and therefore this car went into production with front-wheel drive, and the letter B appeared in the model designation to distinguish the front-wheel drive modification. The power takeoff shaft in the checkpoint, which was not used for its intended purpose, was adapted to drive agricultural equipment. In modern terms, the type of drive of this car was determined by the architecture of the platform, since the 30-horsepower MMZ-969 engine installed on the LuAZ-969V moved from the Zaporozhets, where it was located at the rear, transferring power to the rear axle. To create a front-wheel drive car, there is no easier way than to take a rear-engine car, turn the power unit 180 degrees, and move it to the front of the vehicle. Until the early 1970s, more than 7,000 such front-wheel drive LuAZ models were produced. Then the problems with the components were solved. The car received all-wheel drive and returned its original index, LuAZ 969 or ZAZ 969, since in the early 1970s, LuAZ and ZAZ were part of the same concern, if I may say so, a production association. You can laugh at this car if you see it on the road, but it really shows itself well off-road. Its military amphibious roots make themselves felt. The engine, gearbox, main gear, and gimbal are compactly placed in a body with an integrated frame, and all these elements are actually in one sealed shell. The gimbal passes through a pipe. The suspension with independent torsion bars and longitudinal levers at the front and rear provides a great ride, and the standard 13-inch tire has very effective ground hooks. If we also take into account the wheel reducers, the locking of the rear interwheel differential, and the successful weight distribution due to the forward displacement of the cabin and power unit, which provide load on the front axle and excellent cross-country ability, the absence of locking of the front differential, then we see a 28-centimeter clearance and a very low center point in the LuAZ. Therefore, off-road, this car can surpass many others. Look at the photos and compare them with those where the TPC is trying to overcome the same elevation, probably the same one. It seems that the civilian version copes with this no worse. At the same time, the car turned out to be reliable and easy to operate like a tank. A miniature tank with an engine from Zaporozhets. Some fans of this car believe that it is this feature, the use of the MIM-Z engine, which was originally intended for the Zaporozhets, significantly worsened the characteristics of the car. But it is worth noting that it was thanks to this engine that LuAZ was born. If it were not for him, then perhaps there would be no Volyn. And the engine on the front-wheel drive LuAZ worked much better than on the Zaporozhets with a rear engine because he did not have a family disease in the form of overheating. But at the same time, it was the low-power air-cooled engine that prevented Volyn from becoming a standard car with an acceptable microclimate inside, noise levels, and decent driving characteristics. Such is the contradiction. How did it all work? To be honest, it's not very good. To confirm my words, I will quote from the test of that time. Here is what Vadim Kotlyarov writes about his experience driving this car from Lutsk to Tolyatti in his book A-Roads. The engine is quite puny, 40 horsepower. Therefore, the designers were forced to godlessly lift up the transmission ratios so that the car could somehow move. The first show reminded me, tank. I'm still a tankman. The engine roars, the car barely crawls. I turn on the second one. Everything is almost the same. Only in the last, IV gear does something like a ride turnout. Then it turned out that it was possible to even move off without much difficulty. Of course, out of the blue or on the descent. Driving on the Volyn highway for long distances is not an occupation for the faint of heart, uphill or downhill. It does not work out in any way more than 60 kilometers per h. There is only one salvation here, non-stop measured driving. Then you gradually get into a rhythm, stopping only for refueling. In Soviet times, the car was tried several times to improve, and it cannot be said that unsuccessfully. In 1975, the Volyn was equipped with an updated MEMZ969A engine upgraded to 40 GP. The model was named, understandably, LuAZ-969A, and 4 years later, in 1979, the LuAZ-969M, upgraded, was put into production. Two separate brake circuits with an amplifier in the front, an updated front, a different shape of the windshield, doors with locks, yes, they did not exist before, and window frames, plastic dashboard, injury-proof steering wheel, seats from LuAZ. The front part of the body became less angular, and the car immediately began to look different. It seems incredible, but a small car from a small Soviet city achieved international recognition. Before the start of mass production, in 1978, the LuAZ-969M entered the top 10 European SUVs at the Turin International Motor Show. Of course, in those days, the market for SUVs and cars in general was somewhat different, but nevertheless, this is an achievement. A change in the model indexing system in the USSR led to the renaming of the LuAZ-969M to the LuAZ-1302. Although this change was made in 1985, the first cars with a new name from Lutsk appeared only in 1990. Which was already a completely different car with more advanced characteristics. The main difference was the new engine, which was developed using Tavria. Yes, ZAZ helped the manufacturers from Lutsk again and equipped the SUV with a new water-cooled engine. This engine has 4 cylinders and a power of 53 horsepower, which ensures good acceleration and economy of the car. According to the technical data, the 969M consumed 10 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers when traveling at a speed of about 60 kilometers per hour, but its consumption increased with increasing speed, and a full tank, 34 liters, was enough for a shorter distance. In this regard, the new Volyn is more economical. Its consumption is 7.7 liters, and it can accelerate to 100 kilometers per hour. Previously, its maximum speed was 85 kilometers per hour. On August 24, 1991, about a year after the launch of the LuAZ-969, Ukraine seceded from the USSR and became an independent state. LuAZ's contacts with Russia have ceased. LuAZ-969, in addition to the engine, borrowed seats from Tavria, VAZ seats, for example, from VAZ 2108, and there was nowhere else to take them, and also received reinforced spars and additional noise and vibration isolation. The machine turned out to be quite good, faster, quieter, and more economical than its predecessor. But for Russian fans of the brand, such cars were no longer available. Unfortunately, the exact date of naming the model Volyn has not been preserved in available sources. This can be explained by the fact that in the USSR, car names were assigned randomly, and the closer to the collapse of the Union, the less often. The name of the car in the USSR served solely for aesthetic pleasure, since there was no task to take away buyers from competing models. Nevertheless, the name Volyn was used in various sources, both in relation to the first version of the LuAZ-969 SUV, released in 1967, and in relation to subsequent models of the LuAZ-969M, produced from 1979 to 1990. The people, however, have their own set of names for this car. Bagpipes is not only a derivative of the name, but also a hint of the noble sound of the Melitopol engine. BMW stands for Combat Vehicle of Volhynia, Lunokhod, for the wheel reducers and peculiar appearance. Luntik, short for Lunokhod, appeared in the 2000s. Lumumzik, from Lums, the early designation of the LuAZ plant when it was still machine, building, not automotive. LuAZ is a derivative of Louise. Jerboa, for the ability to jump on any surface. Studebaker, for gluttony. Hummer, for the passability. Cheburashka, for the big headlights. Iron, for the body shape. Fantomas, for comedic and villainous appearance. Jewish armored car, for the combination of qualities obtained for little money. In addition, the car has the nicknames Losherik, Chapik, and Piano. It can be said that LuAZ is the owner of the largest number of nicknames among cars of the former USSR. Compared to this variety of folk art, the official name, Volyn, looks rather boring. As you know, the prototype of Volyn TPK had several varieties, including 3-axis models. As for Volyn itself, it also had many options. It is noteworthy that most of them were created already in the post-Soviet period on the basis of Model 1302. The plant simultaneously tried to adapt to the laws of the market economy and satisfy the state order. Modifications with a body, an elongated wheelbase, a rigid roof, an elongated rear overhang, 4 doors, and special versions were released. Foros with a Jeep design and a unique 6-wheeled amphibian geologist. These vehicles, which inherited the cross-country capability of the frontline Army transporter, easily overcame impassable areas, where other vehicles such as GAZ, UAZ, and even Niva had difficulties. In remote areas, they greatly facilitated the work of repair crews, exploration, and medical groups. However, now all these cars are in the past, despite the fact that the number of impassable areas on the territory of the former Soviet Union has apparently not decreased. Why did the Volyn with the Tavria engine receive the index 13002 when the first model in the new classification should start with 01? This is because the 1301 index has already been occupied by another car since 1984. Unfortunately, LuAZ could not avoid the main problem characteristic of the entire Soviet automotive industry, inertia. The fate of Volyn, a long way to success. The slow update of the 969M model had a negative impact on the fate of Volyn. The first samples of the improved version were ready to go into production back in 1973, but they got on the assembly line only in 1979. The engineers did their best to fix the situation. In 1984, LuAZ developed a car on the old platform, but with a completely new plastic body. This model was to receive the designation 1301. For 10 years, due to the inability to start production, the car has undergone changes and improvements. In the late 1990s, the press started talking about it again and even set a production start date of 2003. A competition was held for the best title, but unfortunately winning. In 1988 to 1989, developers from the Leningrad Laboratory for Modeling Promising Cars created an alternative version of the LuAZ-969. This car featured a more stylish and modern plastic body. The car was named LuAZ Proto. It had a 6-speed gearbox, an engine from Tavria, an original transmission system with plug-in front-wheel drive, and an integral-type hood that reclined along with the wings. The exterior of the car was attractive even by today's standards, but despite all its advantages, LuAZ Proto has remained a prototype. In the period from 1966 to 1989, the LuAZ automobile plant produced about 182,000 cars. This is a small number, but the plant, which consisted of only a few small workshops, became famous thanks to one civilian model. Volyn evokes a variety of feelings in people. They either love it or hate it, but there are no indifferent people. This unique SUV is extremely imperfect in terms of comfort, but it opens up space for creativity. LuAZ is popular as an object for tuning and a source of inspiration for coming up with nicknames. Love and hate are what unites us, the inhabitants of the former Soviet Union. We can love and hate inanimate objects as much as we hate people. If you want to become the owner of LuAZ or iron, you can find workable options in Russia at a price from 60,000 to 400,000 rubles. The maximum price is for perfectly restored cars. That's it. Thanks for watching.